Hello, Golden Knights schedule came out, and it's time for us to look at it. To look at a lot of different things. At first glance, I will tell you, I think this schedule is worse than last year for a couple of different reasons. First off, I feel like the start is a little bit more difficult with the road games at the beginning, and I'll go over that in a second. The back-to-backs, there are not nearly as many teams coming to Vegas on the second night of the back-to-back as there were last year. That was a big benefit. That's why a lot of the road teams were playing backup goalies. We don't have as much of that. And then I just feel like down the stretch, in April, there's like an at Edmonton, at Colorado, Winnipeg, Seattle. Seattle should be fine, but that's not as good. This is a little tough. So overall, my sense is it might be a little bit more difficult, but we'll start straight off the top. LA and San Jose back to back. LA plays here on the 7th. So they're playing at home against Anaheim, and then they come to Vegas. So we have that, and then we also have the Golden Knights doing that right afterwards. I view this two ways. One, it's nice to be playing the second night of a back-to-back against LA because LA has been tough on the Golden Knights. Vegas is usually very, very good in openers. I believe they're 7 of 8. So that should be a win. And I like getting a more difficult opponent in a spot that it should be a win. Same thing. I kind of don't mind it on Nevada Day there at that noon game. Same thing with Nashville. I don't mind the Nashville one on New Year's Eve. But I would say that like if there's ever a time that you want to play a back to back, it's probably the first couple of days of the season because you're preparing for it, you're ready, the travel shouldn't really impact you that much as I like the fact that we're getting LA in that spot, I also think it potentially could be not as beneficial as it would be down the road for other situations of getting LA, and the Golden Knights do get LA on a back to back later. And also, I think this game here, the San Jose game, shouldn't really be a problem. I know it's a back to back, and you look at that and you're like, we're going to play the backup goalie. That's the one thing that I'm a little nervous about is who is going to be the backup goalie. He's going to have to play immediately. And that's basically the only game he has to play the entirety of the month. Could very well be the only game that player plays the back, the entire month. Don't love that setup, but it's San Jose. The Golden Knights should be in good shape, should be able to beat them. I do think it's going to be fairly important to make sure they get a game out of those two, just because these next two, they usually win at Seattle. They usually do fairly well in Calgary. Pacific Division games usually go fairly well. Then it's Boston and Calgary. Of those four games, San Jose, Seattle, Calgary, Boston, and then Calgary again. So there's what, one, two, three, four, five. So of the first 6 games, I feel like you probably need 4 wins out of that. 3 to 4 wins out of that, because then Carolina, Florida, Tampa back to back, at Carolina, 2 days off, early game against Colorado. That's 11 games it's not too bad, 8 to 31. So it's like 11 games in about 3 weeks. That's not horrible. It's not terribly crunched, but usually Cassidy teams get off to a hot start. I think that like the first 6 games indicate that could very well happen again. But with the fact that there's 3 road games right off the top, three road games out of the first 4. Um, what is it? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 road games out of the first 10. That's quite a bit, but it ends up being 10 out of 17 at home to start because it really gets into a big home stand here with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then there's one up here with the Colorado game there. So it's actually 6. Problem is, those aren't particularly easy teams necessarily. Colorado, then Detroit. Detroit, they should be able to beat. Tampa's going to be tough. Anaheim, I think you want them later in the season as opposed to earlier in the season. I would kind of say the same thing about the Sharks. So getting them there, I don't think is ideal. Should still be a win, most likely, but we'll see. Florida, New York Islanders have been a bit of a problem for the Golden Knights. Low scoring team, play that style. Maybe this version of the Golden Knights will be better against that. I think they probably will. So maybe that one's not as much of a concern, but that's That's 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 games. 10 of them are at home. There's a lot of playoff teams in there. There's a lot of difficult matchups in there. I don't know that that's necessarily a bad thing though. Like on face value, I look at this and I say, wow, this is a lot more difficult than what we're used to seeing. We usually see a lot of home games. There are quite a bit of home games, 10 out of the first 17, but usually it's not three out of the first four are away. We also typically get a lot of Pacific Division teams at the beginning of the season. It's not necessarily the case. Yes, it is all four of the first four, and then five out of the first six, but then it kind of goes away. Florida, Tampa, Carolina twice, Boston, Colorado, Detroit, Tampa, Florida, New York, St. Louis, Minnesota, New York, Utah. Like there's a lot of not Pacific Division teams, and usually the Golden Knights feast on Pacific Division teams early. So the good news to me here, though, is like if you told me there has to be a difficult portion of the schedule, you're going to get a lot of the playoff teams at a certain time. I would say I'd want that for Vegas early. So in that respect, I like the fact that there is time in between games here on the most important stretch right here, Florida and Tampa. You're getting the extra 3 day or 4 days before you have to do that travel. The home game at the end is Carolina. I like it there. Really focus up if things don't go well against Boston or Calgary. They can get ready for that one. Don't love the early road trip. I don't know if they're going to come back in between Seattle and Calgary here. That's a long early road trip. Don't love that. Those typically end up with injuries. I've noticed on long term, you see some injuries on some of those. So I don't love that early. But Cassidy teams are usually very good. They usually win somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 of their first 15. I think that's certainly possible again. And if they do it, and we get to somewhere in this part of the schedule where they've won 10 of the first 15, it should be pretty well easy flowing for the rest of the season because it does ease up a little bit. You could see just right here in the end of November. I think that's probably the easiest spot of the entire schedule, starting right here on the 18th. New York at Utah, at Anaheim, at Utah again. Don't love two at Utahs out of three games because usually you split those. So I don't like that as much. But Ottawa, Montreal, San Jose, then it bleeds over and it's Chicago. Even the trip, Jersey, New York, Philly, Columbus, like it's not that difficult in that portion. So the good news is, even if they don't get off to a hot start, it should come back to being fine come middle of November to early December. You're going to have to be in a pretty good spot by this right here, though, December 2nd. If they're not, if they're, say, 500 or something, and then embarking on this 5 game road trip, and then it really jams up in January, that's where it gets a little bit tricky. The one thing I will say about January, and I think it's important to note about January, because you just look at the schedule and it looks like a complete disaster in regards to how much pink is on there compared to blue, how many back-to-backs are on there. There's what, three inside of this month, and then the 31st bleeds over into the first, so that's another one. So there's a lot in there, but first thing first is a lot of these, the other teams on a back-to-back. The Chicago game on the 4th, the St. Louis game on the 10th, Nashville on the 17th, San Jose on the 25th, and Ottawa on the, or sorry, San Jose on the 22nd and Ottawa on the 25th. That's one, two, three, four, five of the games. The other team is on a back-to-back. And in none of those that I mentioned is Vegas on a back-to-back. So while Vegas does have the back-to-backs in this one here on the 11th, again on the 15th, then on the 23rd, then on the 1st of February, there are four there, but there are also five where the other team has back-to-backs. So that's to me a fairly positive look at that month. Also, I don't think there's a ton of really difficult teams in there. I think they're going to be up for the two Toronto games. That's probably the most difficult team on the board. Maybe Winnipeg at Winnipeg could be a little bit more difficult, but at LA, but the two Toronto games, Vegas is going to be up for them. The Dallas games at home, I maybe St. Louis is a little better, maybe Nashville's a little bit better, Ottawa can be better, but like there's not a lot in there. Columbus, San Jose, Boston, Seattle, Montreal, Ottawa. Like there's a lot of winnable games in there, and literally all of the ones that I mentioned that are the other team on the back-to-back, Chicago, St. Louis, Nashville, San Jose, and Ottawa, those are all winnable. So in theory, that should be 5 wins, even if things go poorly in some of the games that Vegas is on the back-to-back, and one of them is San Jose, so usually those don't go poorly. The other two are Toronto, and then the last one finishes up with what, Chicago, so that's not bad, right? No, Anaheim. So that's not bad. It should be fine through there. And the other thing that I was surprised by this, because I always break them down into like home and home back to backs, road and road back to backs. And I've always kind of figured the most challenging one is the home road. And when you play on home and then you have to go immediately on the road, I've always thought that's probably one of the most challenging ones. We don't have one of those. Oh, yeah, we do have one at the end here. And then, yeah, another one here on 10 and 11, and then 31 and 1. Vegas is historically dominant in these. 4 points like 70% of the time, at least 2 points in all of them. They've never been swept in a back to back with a home and road back to back. So that's really good to see. Um, so that, in that respect, makes that month quite a bit easier than, say, this month here, where there are a ton of back to backs. It gets really congested back to back in Buffalo and Dallas. Then there's the Nashville Dallas one later. So it's or Buffalo Detroit, then Nashville Dallas. This is just a jammed up month. Like there's not a lot of days off in between. Very rarely are they even getting two. This is a month you're going to want to be in a pretty good spot for because there's going to be some big games in there. There's Edmonton games, there's Dallas games, there's a Winnipeg game, Nashville, Minnesota. There's a lot of games. Even Vancouver could be difficult towards the end. I don't think Vancouver is going to be any good, but if they are, maybe things go differently there. That month you want to be in a good spot before you get to that month. And that's where February, it's really hard to determine much of anything on February. This is a long trip right out of the break. LA to Washington is just odd. I see why they did it. It's like, well, you're coming off the break. Vegas going to have a lot of guys off the break. LA, Washington, Pittsburgh, Buffalo, Detroit. The last couple of the games is a back to back. There's a 3 and 4 right there. Like that's a tough, tough, tough trip coming out of it. So getting into the break in pretty good position to be able to maybe coast through that with 2 wins or maybe even a win and 1 win and an overtime loss and be able to come back home. Problem is, you get back home, it's Minnesota, it's Edmonton, got to go to Dallas, then it's Pittsburgh and Chicago, which are in theory winnable. January is going to be important. January, December, these are going to be important months. I think December's probably the month where they're going to want to make the most hay. You look at Chicago, New Jersey, New York, Philly. Like I know a lot of these are road games, but then the home games, Jersey, San Jose, Minnesota, Nashville, like a lot of these are winnable. So getting off to a good start, maybe right here off the top would be nice. And then getting going in the back end of November into early December, that's where they're going to really have to do it because I do think the schedule gets really difficult. That's why I don't particularly like it. It is one less back to back than we had last year. Don't think one is going to make a huge difference. Golden Knights were actually better than most teams in back to backs last season. So that in and of itself, I don't think one difference really changes all that much. There's also one other thing that's one different, and that's that they only have 6 games with 3 days rest as opposed to last year's 7. They were 7-0 in those games. So if they can get all 6 of those games, it can be really beneficial. Certainly the 2 against LA, which is the first one on opening night, and then the one out of the Olympic break there would be another one against LA. Most of the LA games are in weird situations. There's a back to back on this one. There's opening night where they're on the back to back on the other one. This one's coming out of the deadline or out of the break. What do we have around the deadline? Deadline should be, yeah, it's going to be Edmonton, Dallas, Pittsburgh. So the deadline's going to be a little iffy too. The long homestand, I don't love it comparatively to what we're used to. So oftentimes we get long homestands and there's a couple gimmies in there. I don't think there's as many gimmies. I talked about that earlier. It's right here. Detroit, Tampa, Anaheim, Florida, New York. I don't think it's as easy. I don't think that the road trips are as bad as they could be, though. So that's a benefit. And then the last thing I'll mention is that the end of the season, there's no 3 days off at all from the last 24 games. So I don't like that at all because usually that's kind of the reset that this team usually needs. They come right out of that Olympic break and then they're right into a 3-4 fairly quickly every other night for basically 4 or 5 weeks straight. That's a little concerning. And then leading into the postseason, which I would imagine would probably start right here on the 18th. We'll have to see what WrestleMania has going on with that. We'll get to that. We'll cross that bridge when we get there. But that's not great. But what is good about this is there's not a back to back like at all. Like there's one here, Buffalo, Detroit, and then that's it. Like there's one here, Nashville and Dallas towards the end, and then the last all of April. A lot of division games, a lot of winnable division games. Golden Knights are usually good in the division down the stretch. Edmonton, Vancouver, Calgary, Edmonton again, Seattle, Vancouver on the road, Seattle at home. Like there's a lot of winnable games down the stretch. So if they are in a position where they do need points, I don't think that's going to be the case. But if they are, because maybe it doesn't get off to as hot of a start because of some of those road games at the beginning, or if things trip up through the middle of March and that out of the break thing goes poorly, that's kind of my overall sense is like, well, at least the end of the season, home games right at the end of March. Not the worst trip there travel wise. Edmonton, couple days off, then a quick trip over to Vancouver, quick trip over to Seattle. I don't love Colorado at the end of a road trip. Hopefully that game doesn't matter. Then you come home. I would imagine Winnipeg will probably not be fighting for much at that point. Hopefully Vegas isn't either, but if that's a game they need, Seattle, I don't think they're very good either. So that's a good last game to have, and it's a home game. I think there's a lot there to look at to say that is good. But I do believe overall the start is not great. It's not horrible, but it's not great just because the quality of competition is better than we're used to seeing off the top. This is excellent. November's excellent. Early December's not bad. The road trip's not terrible. The early road trip, the hardest road trip. It's going to be cold, which sucks. I'm not going on it for that very reason. But overall, getting points in November is going to be crucial because I do think it may not be as easy to get off to the hot start. If they do get off to the hot start, though, November is going to be cruising time. And I could see us getting to the end of November, Thanksgiving time, and being, well into first place, potentially in the entire league, if things go well to start the season. If they don't, lose one of those games to LA or San Jose, lose one to Seattle or Calgary. That shouldn't happen, but I think it's possible. Win two of the three in Boston and Calgary, but then lose one of these next three or two of these next three, and then the Colorado game. We could very easily be looking at 4 or 5 wins in the first 11. Like it's not crazy that if you just count the easy ones, San Jose, Seattle, Calgary, Boston, Calgary, that's five. That could be it. And then these are all road games at the beginning. Chances they go 4-0 is pretty low with three early road games. So there's probably a loss in there. They do play well at Carolina and against Carolina. So that one I'm not as concerned about. They have actually played pretty well against Tampa as well. But it's the back to back. It's a long way to travel. It's really the first break in the schedule. Like, I don't know they're going to get off to as hot a start as they have in the past. So that's kind of my overall sense of the schedule of saying like it's not bad. I don't look at this and say like there's murderer's row somewhere. The one year there was an 8 game road trip that had the bye mixed into the middle of it. I hated that. There was a one year where they started off on the road a whole bunch in difficult places. There were a couple years where it was pretty difficult down the stretch. Luckily, none of those mattered. There's been more back to backs. There's been more rough travel. There were more single date home games. Like if we go through this, there's not a ton of those. There's one there, but they're mostly clumped together a little bit more. And that's where they really benefit from those home games. Kind of see through there. There's not a ton of single home games, which is really good. So that's certainly a benefit. Overall, though, it's not an easy schedule, but it's not the worst schedule I think we've ever seen. Matrix wise, let me pull that up real quick. Where did it go? There we go. The Matrix, like it's fine. Like I don't think there's really it could have been too much better or worse. I guess it could have been would have rather had Edmonton and Seattle or Edmonton and LA as the three home games as opposed to or three games in the Pacific as opposed to four. Not really that big a deal. The extra game or losing an extra game against Anaheim, not that big a deal. Losing the extra game against Vancouver. I don't love the central layout. I would rather the home games were against Dallas and Winnipeg as opposed to the opposite. Let's go to Chicago twice. Let's go to Minnesota twice. That's not what's happening. But in the end, not a huge deal